Bethlehem College and Seminary is still accepting applications for the coming academic year. For more information, visit bcsmn.edu.
Professor Crutchmer is delighted to take a few questions, and I'll move around the audience with the microphone so everybody can hear the questions. Anybody have any? Anyone? Here we go.
Could you talk more about pity?
Yeah. I use it because Tolkien uses it, knowing, though, that in our minds, when I say it, probably a bunch of negative connotations are going to pop up, right? Everyone after Nietzsche is going to think that pity is used as a weapon by someone above to keep down someone who's below, right? One of the books over there by Ralph Wood, The Gospel According to Tolkien's got a really great little paragraph on this where he shows you, remember, Tolkien is a philologist. Right? He knows the language and the roots of that word pity, and he's happy to use it, I think because, this is Wood's point, its Latin root is pietas, about devotion. It has connotations more that someone is dedicated along with you to your good. Right? It's a mode of piety and fellow feeling. So another scene where Faramir speaks to Éowyn in the Houses of Healing, she says she doesn't want to be pitied, and he says you shouldn't scorn the pity of one who has a heart for you, right? So there are indeed ways of using pity as sort of a weapon against someone, and that's how Saruman takes it at the end, right? Frodo pities him, shows mercy, won't allow Saruman to be killed by the hobbits, even though he quite clearly deserves it. And Saruman throws it back in his face, right? I hate your pity and I hate you. And off he goes. He ends up getting killed at the end. But the point is, he misunderstands it because he's also seeing it as someone who's against him, right? But if I'm for you, then my pity isn't something that I wouldn't feel towards myself either. It is something common between us. And that's why the picture of Bilbo and Frodo and Gollum being this long-lived hobbit-like creature, they see each other in one another, right? I think that's how we're supposed to take it.
Anybody on this side?
Yeah, there's a couple times in the story where the characters will say something along the lines of, and I think Aragorn says this after they lose Gandalf, that well, now we will have to do without hope, and yet they continue to act and to move towards their goal. They don't just give up, right? So I was curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, one of the things that we'll all notice if you attend to Tolkien's writings, you read somebody like Verlin Flieger, who I think is probably the best Tolkien scholar around, Humphrey Carpenter's biography of him too. He's kind of a man in tension, right? He's a Christian, Roman Catholic, believes in the resurrection and the second coming, and yet loves and admires and thinks beautiful all of the sort of fatalistic, almost despairing Anglo-Saxon stories, right? The old story is that a human life is a sparrow flying in one end of the longhouse and going out the other. And so you're going to see things in Tolkien's works. I think that there's a tension between the hope that things might someday come good and this feeling of, well, not for me. I know what it's like, and remember, Tolkien knew what it's like to have beautiful things taken away all the time. So the sorrow of the elves in their leaving isn't utter hopelessness. It's not despair, right? And Aragorn's not despairing, but in your general predictive, anticipatory sense of the world, it looks like there's no hope for us. So in the face of him saying that, he then also leads them to Lothlorien and then knows that he needs to chase down the orcs and Merry and Pippin and then take the paths of the dead and then. He's still acting knowing this bigger thing is needful. And he does the things that a virtuous king, but also someone continuously advises him against. Eowyn says, don't do that. Other men, Theoden does too. So he's still acting in that way based on those things, even though he does speak like this sometimes, because it does look like that. I don't know about you, but that gives me some freedom to feel things and react in certain ways and still be oriented by the sort of overarching theological reality and story at the same time. Yeah, good question.
Who is your favorite character and why?
Favorite character and why? I gotta pick. Okay, Sam. In terms of main characters, Tom Bombadil, very close to my heart. But Sam, because he's a good friend, right? He's the equivalent of the friends that would tear open the roof and let their friend down to get to Jesus. And he grows in such amazing ways, and yet never stops being kind of country hobbit. And yet he is wise beyond all of the gaffer's ever hopes. And the way in which he accompanies his master throughout, I just find massively compelling.
Hi. So I would love to hear your thoughts on Tom Bombadil, but specifically how he ties into this idea of hope, because I have heard at times that he doesn't quite fit into this story, but also that's the picture Tolkien had for how things would be in heaven, and the curious fact about how the ring didn't have an effect on him. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on Tom Bombadil are not yet settled. It's one of those mysteries. Like, there are still essays, articles, arguments being had. What the heck is this guy? Wearing yellow boots and singing ridiculous songs that people like Peter Jackson just don't want to be in the movie at all. I get it, and it seems silly and trite, but there's something just deeply mysterious and profound and interesting, and just, that feeling you get with Tolkien where you just want a bit more of that little tale. Oh, he made that comment about that random elf guy. Where did that come from? It's probably somewhere, right? And so Tom Bombadil kind of scratches that itch for me, and it's, I think, probably something to do with creation rather than heaven, right? He's the resident before the fall, which is why the ring can't have any effect on him whatsoever, but also because he just doesn't seem to care about the ring or the quest or evil or whatever. He's just Tom Bombadil doing his Tom Bombadil thing. And so he plays this weird role where the hobbits kind of get connected, and I love the fact that he's right next door to them. Like, if they just went past that hedge, they would find the oldest thing in the known world, Tom Bombadil and then the Ents. And he's this sort of spirit of the created world before the fall that they get a glimpse of. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know what he's doing. Apparently there's a really great book recently released trying to argue something about Tom Bombadil, which I have not read. Anxious to get to summer to read it.
Time for a couple more. Anybody over here? I'll be like an auctioneer. Anybody over here?
Do you believe Tolkien himself identifies with any particular character in the story? And what of Tolkien's personal story and spiritual journey do you think gets represented in the overall narrative?
It's a tough question, Devin. Because Tolkien himself has said, you shouldn't be looking for me in these books. I'm not writing them about me. I'm not trying to, he's not a modern sort of expressionist artist here. He's really writing a feigned history of the world as he saw it. And so he wanted us to be really, really reticent to draw one-to-one correspondences between any sort of allegorical meaning, but also himself. But again, just like J.K. Rowling or Tolkien, you have to take an author's words with a pinch of salt. And I think that there are probably some, just as if you wrote a story, there would be some of you in it. You can't not do that, right? So are the hobbits kind of like just traditional Yorkshire farming country people? Kinda. The people that Tolkien really learned to get along with in the trenches of World War I? Yeah, kinda. But also kinda not. And so I don't ever want to try and draw a one-to-one or say it's part of his spiritual journey. I'm not capable of doing such a thing. I don't think I know.
Last call for the Tory side of the house here. Going once? Oh, there we go. Professor. Oh,
Uh-oh.
your esteemed colleague now, sir.
I'm generally interested, Matt, if you could help us with the with resurrection. And the way you described the eschaton there, Sam wakes up, but he's still in the world.
Yeah.
And famously, right, the humans aren't given a clear hope of resurrection. So for us actual humans, how do we relate to our hope is resurrection? How do we relate that in the story of, say, for Frodo and Sam and others who are experience it in The Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, John, are you asking more like it seems like it's not grand enough, it's not biblical enough there to really help us and do some interpretive stuff scripturally?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right, but I also think, remember, part of what I was giving as our last big qualification was it's not an allegory. And not every allegory is a Bunyan Pilgrim's Progress type of allegory, right? There's not a one-to-one correspondence, but also Tolkien, I think, is getting at something pretty profound too, that there are little pictures of theological realities that we get in daily life or in mundane earthly life. And this is kind of one of those. That's how I take this passage, to say there is a bit of waking up from a dream that heaven might be like. We're told death is someone falling asleep. Here's Sam waking. He's waking in a place where all of a sudden he was not any longer in danger. He thought he had died. And it's a bit like that. And I think that's what we find a lot in Lord of the Rings, is just little resonances or echoes of the gospel, enough to make us not say, oh, that's the gospel, but oh, that helps me understand a bit more. And so on this one, it's more like the sort of announcement, the sort of entering into joy, the sort of sharing together. You notice that the minstrel had all of the peoples of Middle Earth named, right? Every tribe and tongue and people and nation were there in front of the throne, and there was joy, right? So even though it's not telling the story per se, it does have echoes of it, and it makes it real and vivid, and that's why I love doing this stuff in like a theology class, is because it gives us a little bit of help and makes it just deep. So, thank you very much.
You have curated some books for our consideration that are on sale here tonight, I'm told. Could you tell us a little bit about those, what you might commend?
Yes, indeed. There are some really great texts over there on the book table. One in particular that I love, it's kind of my favorite Tolkien Christian theology book, is by Ralph C. Wood, who I think is still a professor of English literature at Baylor University, called The Gospel According to Tolkien. And also a new one that is on my to-read shelf, but I have not yet it comes highly recommended for many people, by Austin Freeman, called Tolkien Dogmatics, where he's going as if it's a systematic theology textbook, but more like, where can you start to see some of these sort of resonances in theological study with his works, and that's over there as well. But mainly, just read Tolkien. It's so great.
This presentation was made possible by the generous contributors to the Serious Joy Scholarship, permitting our graduates to launch into life and ministry without a burden of student loan debt.